Stevenson was also named a U.S. Presidential Scholar in the Arts in 2017. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Joe Buck and John Smoltz welcoming you back to the City Center Convenience Mart. Uh-oh. She's looking at the cigarettes, but she just grabs the gum off the counter. Stand Up to Cancer and Rally want you to reduce your risk for cancer. Go to takeahealthystand.org.
Is this the time? This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Lakers are back at 500 after last night's 17-point win over Dallas at Crypto.com. Anthony Davis messed around and almost got a triple-double. 28 points, 12 rebounds, and 9 assists. D'Angelo Russell led the Lakers with 29 points. LeBron had 25 and 9 assists. The Lakers are at home Friday night against Brooklyn. LeBron's son, Bronny James, played a season-high 30 minutes last night in USC's Pac-12 conference game at Arizona. Bronny had 11 points and 6 assists. USC lost by 15. The Trojans are at Arizona State on Saturday. UCLA's men's basketball team overcame a 15-point deficit in the second half to win by 2 at Arizona State. The Bruins got 18 points from Lazar Stefanovic. Two historic HBCU football programs will play each other for the first time in 75 years. Grambling is hosting Tuskegee on September 7th. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
Climate is king.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we believe that caring for the community means caring about the climate. You might have heard that we announced a pretty bold 12-month, $2 million campaign to do 4 things. Increase climate literacy, turn up the volume on communities of color in the climate conversation, connect everyday people with the resources they need to survive and thrive, and highlight frontline climate justice crusaders of color throughout this year. KBLA Talk 1580 will be bringing you insightful interviews on all of our shows to help raise your climate IQ. Each quarter this year, we will also be hosting free climate events in various communities throughout the city with food, fun, and forward-thinking conversations. Thanks to partners like LADWP, Metro, Caltrans, the Sierra Club, the California Community Foundation, the California Endowment, AQMD, MWD, and more. You'll also be hearing more about a couple of national town halls broadcasting live from Los Angeles, to which you will be invited. And we'll be rolling out a robust social media campaign on all our platforms, as well as an outdoor media campaign, all designed to educate, enlighten, and empower you in our fight for climate justice.
We want cleaner air.
Caring about the community means caring about the climate. At KBLA Talk 1580, we believe that we really can change the world if we care enough. If we care enough. If we care enough. If we care enough. If we care enough.
I'm Tavis Smiley, and we are thrilled to have you hanging out with us today, especially in this hour of our program. I look forward to the dialogue that's about to ensue right about now. Once a champion of school reform, Diane Ravitch became disillusioned with testing and privatization, which put her on a personal and intellectual odyssey, forcing America to confront the unintended consequences of what she calls its education obsession. Diane Ravitch is founding president of the Network for Public Education, and I'm pleased to have her on this program right now. Diane, it's been too long. How are you today?
Oh, I'm just fine, Tavis, and I remember with great fondness the interview with you in what I think was the most beautiful studio in all of Hollywood, and I had a great time, so it's nice to talk to you again.
You are too kind. I had a great time as well, and I'm delighted to have you on this version of Tavis Smiley, so thank you for the hour. There is a lot to unpack here. I want to ask 2 questions, I think, at the very outset, just to set the frame here, and then we'll jump from there. The first is, when you say that we have an education obsession in this country, what do you mean by that? Because there are a number of ways to read that. On the one hand, being obsessed with education could be a good thing. I don't think you mean it that way. So what do you mean when you say that we have an education obsession in America?
Well, I'm trying to remember when I said or wrote that, but I think what's going on right now is we have a lot of incredibly wealthy people who are spending vast amounts of money to privatize public education. And they're people who are mainly on the right wing of the spectrum, and they're pushing vouchers and privatization and charters. And, every time there's a school board election in Los Angeles, millions of dollars come in from out-of-state billionaires. And you have to wonder why. Why do people in New York City and people in Maryland and people in other parts of the country, Arkansas, are they concerned about who's serving on the local school board? But that's happening all over the country, and it has been for the last 10 years. And right now the push is coming from people associated with a group called Moms for Liberty. And really it's a white evangelical group that wants to censor books and censor Black history. So that obsession is not by parents. I mean, parents are obsessed with their kids getting ahead, which is appropriate. But the obsession comes from people who have really no interest in educating kids, but a lot of interest in taking control of what they learn.
We'll talk about Moms for Liberty as we move through this hour. I'm going to follow you as I will for the entire hour, as I always do, because you set me up so nicely. It's easy to follow you. Let me probe this first. And I'm not naive in asking this, but why? And we could name them from Bill Gates on down. But why are these wealthy white men so obsessed themselves with American education? What's that about? I mean, they've gone through the system. Their kids and grandkids have gone through the system, and for whatever reason, they keep pouring millions and billions of their dollars into this system. Why are these rich white males, so obsessed with the way we do education?
Well, I think that there has always been a group in the population that thought that if they could control education, they could control the future. And that's not far off, because if you determine what children are learning, you're going to have a big impact on the future. If you start turning schools into job training facilities rather than liberal arts, liberal arts are about freedom. And if you just have a narrow job perspective, then you may be training people to get a job right after school or to leave school and join the workforce, because we now have about a half a dozen states that have eliminated their child labor laws or made them so lenient that children are leaving school to work in dangerous jobs, which, it's like rolling the clock back 100 years. But why are they so obsessed? It's all about control and power. And, some of these billionaires, like Bill Gates, since you mentioned him, he went to private school, but he does have this belief that because he's so rich, he knows everything. And the media follows his every move, thinking he's so rich, he must know everything. But then there's a guy, the richest man in Pennsylvania is a guy named Jeffrey Yass, Y-A-S-S. And Jeffrey Yass just gave, in December, he gave the governor of Texas $6 million to push vouchers. Now, he's opposed to abortion, and he funds people he's opposed to critical race theory, and he's a graduate of the New York City Public Schools, but he's spending money as if he's worth $32 billion. So, $6 million to the governor of Texas is nothing to him, but he wants vouchers. Now, here's a guy who's a graduate of public school and who made, you would have to say he made good. He's a multi-billionaire. But he's using the money that to buy power and to overrule the people who are, let's say, parents and local people who don't want vouchers. They want their community public schools.
Let me ask.
And they want them better.
Yeah. Let me ask point blank whether or not all of this money, all these millions, are having any meaningful impact.
Well, unfortunately, they are, because just this past year, 2023. Was the big year of privatization, and states like Tennessee, Arkansas, states in the Midwest, and states in the South, I think there were 14 of them that adopted vouchers. And then a state like Florida went from having vouchers that were targeted towards low-income kids and vouchers for kids with special needs. And they said, well, why not have a universal voucher? So the universal voucher goes to everybody, whether you're rich or poor, and it doesn't make any sense at all. If somebody's worth $1 billion, why should they get $8,000 to send their kid to an elite private school? But it's been estimated that vouchers in Florida are mainly going to go to people who are already attending private schools. It's going to religious schools where the teachers are not certified. It's crazy. Yeah. I'm starting to feel the rage rise in me as I see what's happening, which is in state after state, we now know two things about vouchers. One is kids are sent to inferior schools. In most cases, they're not going to elite private schools. They're not being sent to the best schools because the best schools are taking paying customers at $25 or $30 or $40,000 a year, and that $8,000 voucher doesn't do anything. Where they are going, for the most part, in states like Florida and Arkansas, is to backwoods evangelical schools where they're learning the Bible is their textbook. Yeah. And if you think the Bible should be a textbook, then you don't care about science or mathematics or history.
Yeah. Let me pause right there. You can see she's warming up. As she said, the rage is starting to rise in her again. I want to go back. When we come forward, I want to go back and ask her what happened in her life. I said earlier she was once a champion of school reform. Then she became disillusioned, and she did a 180. We'll talk about how and why that 180 happened. We're talking to Diane Ravitch right now on Tavis Smiley.
This is getting good.
Yeah, man.
Tavis Smiley continues when we come forward.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
What's up? I'm Danelle Riley, FAMU alumni and creator of the HBCU Culture Shop. I am so proud of my new partnership with Black Beyond Measure and Target. They help me elevate community pride with my HBCU designs and continue to support Black creators and entrepreneurs with Target HBCU challenges, scholarship programs, and campus collaborations. Let's come together this homecoming season and beyond. Shop my brand and discover other Black-owned products at target.com/BlackBeyondMeasure.
KBLA Talk 1580 is the exclusive media sponsor of This Light of Ours, activist photographers of the Civil Rights Movement. A dynamic new exhibition on view now at the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles. This Light of Ours showcases more than 150 photos taken by movement insiders from diverse backgrounds that reveal the vital work undertaken by a broad coalition of organizers and everyday people whose collective action changed America. This Light of Ours is one of 3 temporary exhibitions currently on view at the Skirball, which together explore issues related to civil rights, immigration, and pluralism. Tickets and more information for all 3 exhibitions are available at skirball.org. That's skirball.org. SKIRBALL.org.
Let's get back to more of Tavis Smiley right now.
More of Tavis Smiley and Diane Ravitch right now as we talk about America's obsession with education and what that means. It cuts a variety of ways, and we're going to work through that in this hour. So, Diane, let me go back to some years ago when you were then a champion of school reform. Tell me about that mindset then and what happened.
Well, I just finished writing my memoirs, and I had to really think hard about what was it that turned me around. And I think, this may sound crazy, but I think I was brought up in a very middle-class family, and then I married a man who was very wealthy, and I had a lot of privilege, and I started thinking, maybe this is the way the world is supposed to work, that when you have things, you hold on to them, you protect them, and everybody should be judged by test scores and merit, and I had high test scores, and people with low test scores shouldn't have the same opportunities that I have. That was very selfish of me. And as I got older, I think I got wiser, and I began to say to myself, I was lucky to have high test scores. I know somehow it worked out that I was the kind of person who could sit down to a test and ace the questions.
Mm-hmm.
But so what? Where does that get you? I mean, there are a lot of people with high test scores who have no interpersonal skills. You see people who are successful in life, like all those people who won the Golden Globes and the Emmys, and I can't help by thinking, what was their test score? And probably they had low test scores, but what they had was an incredible artistic talent.
Yeah.
And we discount the artistic talent and the ability to be empathetic and to relate to other people. And the same thing when I see Simone Biles do whatever she does in the air, and I kind of laugh to myself and I think, I don't care what her test scores were. She's amazing.
Yeah.
And so I guess that after years of being all about competition and merit and test scores, I began thinking, this is nuts. This is really not the way the world should work. What we need more of in this world is people who care and people who understand that when others are suffering or in pain, you help them. You don't discard them. And our society is very ruthless right now. And we have been for a long time. I mentioned earlier the rollback of child labor laws. That makes me crazy, and I don't understand it. And it happened in Arkansas. It's happened in Iowa. And in many states, they simply are ignoring the child labor laws. And that's the case in Florida. A lot of the bad things that are happening now started a long time ago under this very harsh right-wing view that you're on your own, and if you can't make it, it's your fault.
What's behind? You referenced it a couple times now. What is behind, to your mind, this rollback of these child labor laws?
I think that there's a couple of things. One is you've got the rise of this libertarian view that government shouldn't tell anyone what to do, and if the parents say it's okay for their child to drop out of school and go to work at the age of 14 or 15, that's their choice. And we've had laws in this country since probably 1912 to protect children from working in dangerous jobs or from leaving school before they have an education. So what's behind it is, first of all, that kind of libertarianism that says everyone's on their own and I have no responsibility for anybody else. But also, it's got tied into the immigration issue because there are so many states that have criminalized taking in migrants, although they're coming anyway, but they're not allowed to work. And so if they're not allowed to work and you need somebody to put up roofs, who are you going to hire to do it when you can't hire the immigrants? So you find 14 and 15-year-old kids. They're very good at roofing. I understand. I've heard from people who've done roofing that, they're very fast, they're very light on their feet. But if they're not wearing a safety harness, they're in a job where they can literally die.
What do you think the unintended consequences are? I'm sure there's more than one or two, but to your mind, what are the unintended consequences of our education obsession?
I think that you got to think of the obsession in different ways. There's the healthy obsession where you really care about what happens to your child, and not only care about what happens to your child, but care about what happens to the rising generation. And, I know this country is becoming more and more multicultural, multi-ethnic, and that's just the way it is. So in a state like Texas, for example, I think the majority of kids in the public schools there are now African American and Hispanic. And that kind of foretells what the future will be. But they have underfunded their schools for the last dozen years, and the state of Texas has like a $30 billion surplus, and they're not giving any raises to teachers or they're not putting any money in the classrooms because they want it for tax cuts. And so when you put money into tax cuts instead of into children, that's very bad for the country. That's very bad for your state. And that's what the red state governors are doing.
Speaking of red state governors, tell me more about these Moms for Liberty.
Well, Moms for Liberty started in Florida, and there were 3 very right-wing women who said that they didn't like what was happening in the public schools because they decided that teachers were grooming children to be homosexual, and that teachers were grooming, and they were introducing children to all kinds of sexual content which they shouldn't be. And the Moms for Liberty really came out hard in Florida and now in many states against both any kind of introduction to sex education, and also they're very much in favor of book banning. They've got a long list of books that they say shouldn't be in schools, and some of them are completely innocuous. They're just sex education. But there also have been outspoken against books that deal honestly and accurately with Black history. And they started in Florida, and Governor DeSantis, who I think is a dangerous man, he has passed laws which have really curtailed the teaching of Black history because teachers aren't sure what they're allowed to teach. And so the best thing they can do is to just homogenize everything and make it like they have this thing called divisive concepts. And so in the Florida law, it says that teaching about slavery has to make it sound like there was the good side of slavery, because after all, slavery gave people work skills.
Jobs program.
And that helps to prepare them for the future.
Yeah, it's a jobs program, yeah.
Right, yeah. So, it's nutty, and there's a very distinguished Black professor, Dr. Marvin Dunn, in Florida. And Dr. Dunn has written several books about the history of Florida seen from a Black perspective. And it's got a horrible history of racism, of lynchings, of massacres, et cetera. And DeSantis wants to bury all that. And that's just not right. And, it extends to other issues as well. He hates drag queens and thinks that people should be fined and punished if they take their children to drag shows, even though out of one side of his mouth he's talking parental rights, and out of the other he's saying even if your parent takes you, you cannot go to a drag queen story hour at the local public library. And it's, he's obsessed with these culture war issues. And I think a large part of it's because he's wants to ignore the real issues that affect people's lives, like the cost of health insurance and the cost of home insurance, which has skyrocketed in the state of Florida.
Yep.
But he'd rather talk about drag queens than talk about the cost of living.
It's fascinating for me that a group that calls itself Moms for Liberty wants to then ban books. They're for liberty, but they want to ban books. They don't want you to have the liberty and the freedom to read what you need to read, want to read, or ought to read. I digress on that particular point. I'll come back.
That's a very important point to digress on, though, because if one parent lodges a complaint against a book, then it will be banned statewide until it's been investigated and approved by the state.
Just one parent?
Just one parent.
Wow.
And there have been some active parents who come up with long lists of books, and when they've been asked, they admit that they haven't even read them.
Yeah. What? I'm not naive in asking this, but what do you make of the fact that we've gotten to a place in this country, in places like Florida, where, to your point, this is speaking of digressing. I want to pause for a second here, because what you just said is worth wrestling with. What do you make of the fact that in a state as important and as big as Florida, that one single solitary parent can make a complaint about a book, whether they've read it or not, and that book is automatically banned until it has been investigated? Just one person. It sounds like the U.S. Senate, where one person can hold everything up. But I digress once again. Your thoughts, Diane Ravitch?
Well, I think that a lot of this comes from DeSantis, because DeSantis is what I call a big government conservative. And he's not really a conservative, because there's nothing conservative about having the government censoring books and getting into people's personal lives, like, going into their bedroom and saying if you're are married to somebody of the same sex, you're somehow criminal. And DeSantis is pushing a lot of this. And, for example, just last night, the state legislature was passing, I think they passed a bill saying that children under a certain age can't have social media accounts. Well, that's going to be knocked down by the courts. That's definitely an intrusion on free speech and freedom of information. And I just think it's nuts. But what's behind it is this belief that if you have enough power, you can use it to make people conform to your beliefs. I think the same issue is involved, for example, in the question of abortion. And my view is if you don't believe in abortion, you shouldn't have one. But if you have no problem with it and you need to have an abortion for personal reasons, it's between you and your doctor. But then they bring the government in to say nobody can have an abortion. And then as you watch the laws roll out in state after state, they're making it in some states almost impossible to have an abortion, even when the mother's life is at risk. So it's this idea that if you have the power, and these conservative states or right-wing states, I guess I should call them, have so gerrymandered their districts, they will stay in power almost forever, regardless of what happens to the population.
Yeah.
Because there are some states like Wisconsin where the state is so gerrymandered that they come up with a overwhelming majority of Republican seats in the state legislature, but the state is elected a Democratic governor. Democrats keep winning statewide elections, but they can't win the legislative elections because the districts are gerrymandered.
Nope, I hear your point.
But,
that's true. Let me. You gonna say something else, Diane? You gonna say something else?
I was going to say that if we go back to choice for just a minute,
Sure.
School choice, and I'm thinking now of vouchers and charters, I think it's very important to remind people where the idea came from. And the idea really took off after the Brown decision. And at that time, the southern states were all passing laws to protect segregation. And they did not want to desegregate. They didn't want any of the court orders to affect them. And so many of them created vouchers where kids could go to private schools and the state would pay for it. And at that time, the Supreme Court knocked them down. They won't knock them down anymore because of the change in this country. But for a long time, what we now call a charter school would have been called a white academy because it was a way of white flight subsidized by the government. And the government was paying for these white flight schools and also for the vouchers. And the Supreme Court kept knocking them down, and now that era seems to be behind us, unfortunately.
No, that backstory, I'm glad you pressed forward on that because that backstory of how this notion of school choice came to be connected to Brown v. Board is important to be reminded of. Let me ask a couple questions about things you've already said. So let me go back and then we'll come forward. Some other stuff I want to cover. But two things you said I want to pick up on right quick, and I've got about 2 minutes right now. We'll continue when we come forward. But right quick here in these 2 minutes, you said that 2023 was the big year of privatization. That's how you put it. What was happening? Why was the ground so fertile for the advancement of privatization in such a significant way last year?
In my view, the ground became fertile, first of all, because there's a lot of money that has been deployed. And the people who want vouchers and want to destroy public schools have been playing the long game. They've been at this a long time, and they have organizations. There's one that's a legal defense fund for all of these right-wing groups. And interestingly, the general counsel for their legal defense fund was Mike Johnson, who's now the Speaker of the House of the U.S. House of Representatives. And so he worked directly for one of these organizations that was funding vouchers and laying the groundwork. Then there's Betsy DeVos, who was Trump's Secretary of Education, and she's a billionaire, and she's been spending on vouchers for the last 30 years. This is her major issue. So she was laying the groundwork, and then Trump finally, in one term, gets 3 people on the Supreme Court, and we now have a Supreme Court with 6 people who are on the right and 3 who will support civil rights and civil liberties and things of that matter. And so I think that the voucher people realize now is the time. The time is right. And sure enough, the first case that came before the court that involved vouchers had to do with 2 evangelical schools in Maine. And they said, the state is giving money for kids to go to private schools if there's no high school in their district. Why can't we get public money? And so the Supreme Court said that even though these 2 schools were highly discriminatory, that they should get public money as well. So that kind of shows you where we're heading now.
Yeah. Speaking of where we're headed now, we're headed to this part of the conversation where I want to talk to Diane Ravitch about the culture wars. You mentioned that earlier. I'm curious as to her take about the role that the culture wars are going to play in this election. I think it's pretty clear it's going to be front and center, but I want to get her view more expressly on the role that the culture wars are going to play in this presidential election season. I want to talk about the role of competition in education, whether or not that's the right word. It certainly exists. Many believe that it should exist, but in what frame? What is the role of competition in education? We'll talk about merit or the lack thereof in education. A great deal more to cover when we come forward with our guest, Diane Ravitch, you're listening to right now, and I'm glad about it, on Tavis Smiley.
More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found BenefitsCheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. BenefitsCheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful. They saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
Thank you for sharing a part of your Thursday with us here on the Black Information Network. In Illinois, a federal jury is convicting 6 suspected gang members of murdering Chicago rapper FBG Duck, whose real name is Carlton Weekly, back in 2020. A jury found that the defendants conspired to murder the African-American rapper in order to maintain and increase their positions in the gang. Those who were convicted were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and murder in the aid of racketeering. We're now learning that well over 100 million Americans could be getting a fresh blanket of snow before the weekend. Forecasters say back-to-back storms will spread at least 3 inches of snow across 18 states, from Wyoming to New York today and tomorrow. Travelers should be ready for delays at airports as well as on highways. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Busy on that 405 southbound drive coming out of the San Fernando Valley from Victory. You're on the brakes towards Sunset. North 405 is slow from La Cienega to the 10, and still very busy on the 10 westbound drive from Western out to Robertson. In industry, an accident working on the 60 westbound past 7th Avenue, moving off to the shoulder.
Joe Buck and John Smoltz welcoming you back to the City Center Convenience Mart. Uh-oh. She's looking at the cigarettes, but she just grabs the gum off the counter. Stand Up to Cancer and Rally want you to reduce your risk for cancer. Go to takeahealthystand.org.
Is this the time? This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
I'm a bad man. The Lakers are back at 500 after last night's 17-point win over Dallas at Crypto.com. Anthony Davis messed around and almost got a triple-double. 28 points, 12 rebounds, and 9 assists. D'Angelo Russell led the Lakers with 29 points. LeBron had 25 and 9 assists. The Lakers are at home Friday night against Brooklyn. LeBron's son, Bronny James, played a season-high 30 minutes last night in USC's Pac-12 conference game at Arizona. Bronny had 11 points and 6 assists. USC lost by 15. The Trojans are at Arizona State on Saturday. UCLA's men's basketball team overcame a 15-point deficit in the second half to win by 2 at Arizona State. The Bruins got 18 points from Lazar Stefanovic. 2 historic HBCU football programs will play each other for the first time in 75 years. Grambling is hosting Tuskegee on September 7th. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
I'm Reverend Gerald, the life coach. Is someone you love struggling with addiction and mental illness? Is improving your family's health important? Want to leave a legacy that your family can grow? Are you ready to enhance your perception of life experiences? Then wake up weekends at 7 a.m. with Urban Family Focus and get the wisdom, opportunity, resources, and motivation to live your best life. Join the conversation on Urban Family Focus Saturday and Sunday at 7 a.m.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio that's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
Right now, there are young people across the world facing a tough choice. Continue their dream of education or drop out to help their family put food on the table. You can help change their future in a single moment. See how far your support can go at unbound.org.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 reminding you that we keep us safe. Pro Football Hall of Famer and urban peace pioneer Jim Brown believed in just that. So he founded the Amera I Can Foundation for Social Change in 1988, focusing on at-risk and high-risk youth in underserved schools and juvenile detention facilities, as well as adult incarceration and reentry initiatives. The core of the Amera I Can program is its 15-chapter life skills curriculum. Mastery of these skills allows individuals to meet their academic potential, conform their behavior to acceptable societal standards, and improve the quality of their lives by equipping them with what they need to confidently and successfully contribute to society. Today, the foundation is led by its president, Monique Brown, who has been actively involved in the organization for more than 25 years. The Amera I Can Foundation continues its work in memory of its founder, actor, philanthropist, and NFL legend Jim Brown. To get involved or make a donation, please visit AmeriICanCommunity.partners. That's AmeriICanCommunity.partners. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Watch out! You got me!
The galaxy is safe once again.
In the pretend universe, kids play with pretend guns. In the real world, it's up to us to make sure they don't get their hands on a real gun. If you have a gun in the house, keep it locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Safe gun storage saves lives. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
He's rooting for everybody black. Everybody black. More of Tavis Smiley coming your way right now.
Well, Tavis Smiley and Diane Ravitch coming your way right now. Research professor, education historian, founder of a network of public education. Once a champion of school reform, but her disillusionment with testing and privatization put her on a personal and intellectual odyssey, forcing America to confront the unintended consequences of its education obsession. Before I move to cover the things I said I wanted to get to right away, Diane, let me ask you on that last comment that I've just made, that you've been about the business of forcing us to confront these unintended consequences of our education obsession. Do you think America sees it yet?
No, I don't think so. I think that people continue to believe that kids should be judged by test scores and that teachers should be judged by test scores. And I think that's an unhealthy obsession because, you know, as we discussed before, the test scores really prove who's good at taking tests, but they don't measure a lot of other things that are even more important. I mean, since we just celebrated Dr. King's birthday, he said the most important outcome of education was character and the ability to tell the difference between what was true and what was false. Those were things that matter far more than whether you got this many points or that many points at questions that were, you know, the way the questions are phrased these days is there might be two right answers or no right answer, and you're supposed to choose the right, wrong answer. So it's ridiculous. Yeah. We're using the wrong measuring stick.
Yeah. Speaking of measuring stick, talk to me broadly about what you think the role of competition is or should be in education, or does it not belong at all?
Well, I think that where competition belongs is in sports. And I think that that's very clear. You know, if you're playing basketball, the team that gets the most points will win. And if you're creating a basketball team and that's the purpose of the team, you want the people who are the best at the way they play on whether it's defense
winning,
or offense.
Yeah, sure.
Same true for everything in sports. I think there are other areas where if you have a science fair, the best science project is going to win. I think, though, that we take it too far, and when we start judging children by test scores, we're using the wrong measure, and competition does not belong there. Let us say, for example, that a family has a child who has issues with school. I mean, maybe they have trouble hearing, they need hearing aids, they don't see well, they need glasses, and they're not getting the medical care they need. That's far more important than the test scores. And if they do get the medical care they need and their scores are average, so what? To you, that child is not average. To you, that child is precious. And I think that teachers have to treat children with the same understanding that each one is a precious child to their family. And to say, oh, he's only in the middle, or he or she is at the bottom, that's just wrong. I mean, that creates a stigma, and many kids just give up once they get that stigma attached to them.
I suspect if Bill Gates or others of his ilk were in this conversation, they'd say, Diane Ravitch, that's where you're wrong. If there's no competition and there are no standards, then how do we judge outcomes?
Well, I think the first thing we have to judge is whether we're providing the adequate resources for our schools, whether we have high standards for people we bring into the classroom as teachers, whether we ensure that every child has, first of all, teachers who are well qualified, and secondly, that they have a class size that makes it possible for the child to get the attention that he or she needs. And so the first standards we need to put in place are the standards for what we do for the school and what the school provides to the child. And if we're underfunding the schools, if the teacher has 34 kids in a classroom and doesn't have time to help the kids who are falling behind, then we failed. The child hasn't failed. So I think that because Gates has never understood that, everything he's funded in education has actually failed.
We were talking earlier about, you were talking earlier about what a big year it was for privatization last year, 2023. I want to juxtapose that against teachers' unions. It seems to me that whatever one thinks about teachers' unions, they're always taking it on the chin. What's your take on teachers' unions in this process, this education process?
Well, I believe in unions, and I think that the great disaster, and what's really one of the things that's been harmful in our economy, has been the successful effort on the part of big business to kill off the unions. There is no one who is helped more by unions than people of color. The unions have historically, over the last century and plus, served as an entrance into the middle class and into the working class. And people who are poor, once they get a union job, they are guaranteed health care and a pension and steady work. And that's very, very important. One of my heroes, and actually he was a friend, was Bayard Rustin.
Oh, yes.
And I very well remember a talk that he gave where he said, you can take a guy who you think is shiftless and can't do anything, put a hammer in his hand, give him a good job with a union card, and he'll take care of himself. And I think that to me is very impressive. Now, why are the teachers' unions always the GOAT? It's because they're almost the only unions that are left. I mean, the anti-union movement has been so successful in killing off private sector unions that the only really, truly powerful unions today are government sector unions. And of them, the biggest are the teachers' unions. So you have these right-wingers who've done such a great job of tearing down our education system and also unfairly tarnishing it. And now they want to get rid of the teachers' unions, and they want teachers to say, now you're free to have no union. Isn't that great? You don't have to pay dues. And you can be a free rider. You can continue to get all the benefits that the union fought for, but you don't have to pay the dues. So this is really, again, it's not about making schools better when they attack the schools. It's about getting rid of the union so that the workers are all on their own and teachers can be more easily fired.
Let me just pause for a second, because I've known you and talked to you a number of times over the years, and I'm always grateful for these dialogues. You always open my eyes in ways that I see things I necessarily hadn't seen before, and I learn things from you all the time. But as many times as I've talked to you, Diane Ravitch, I have never known until now that you were a personal friend of Bayard Rustin, which leads me to ask what you make of the fact that we are in a moment. I just said this a few weeks ago when the movie came out about him, that we are in this moment for the last few years where Bayard Rustin is finally getting his props, finally getting his respect. All these books and documentaries and films, people are finally coming to know and wrestle with the legend of Bayard Rustin. But you were a friend of Bayard's?
Yes. Actually, I met him through my ex-husband. My ex-husband was active. He was a businessman, but he was very engaged in social and political activism, and he became active with the Philip Randolph Institute, and that was led by Bayard Rustin.
Sure.
So he was friendly with Byard, and we got a call one night at about 2 in the morning that Byard had been arrested on 42nd Street because a policeman saw that he had a sword cane. Now, Byard collected all kinds of exotic things from his many travels across the world, and he had a collection of sword canes. Now, I'd never even heard of a sword cane, but it looks like a cane, but you pull out the handle and there's a sword in there. Why he picked that, I don't know. But my ex-husband went down to the police station and got him bailed out. And subsequently, Byard said, I need a place to give a concert to the Young People's Socialist League, and it's going to be a cappella. And then he told us that he used to sing with Josh White, which I had never known. So we had to clear our apartment of furniture, and in came about, 60 or 70 young people from the Young People's Socialist League. And I have to tell you, Tavis, we were living in an apartment building on Park Avenue in Manhattan, and I'm sure that they never had as many socialists and black people in their building in their entire history as they had on that one night. So Byard made a tape that evening, and his adopted son, who was his partner, has made copies of it, and he sang all the great kinds of folk songs a cappella. He was quite a man. I had immense admiration for him.
I'm stunned. Again, I've talked to Diane Ravitch so many times over the years about education and other issues. Had no idea that story was hiding right there. And so when she mentioned Byard Rustin and her friendship, I had to probe that, and I'm glad I did. That's an amazing story. Byard, as I said, is finally getting his respect, and I'm glad about it. And I'm really glad about the fact that Diane Ravitch mentioned his name and gave us a chance to hear that story about Byard Rustin and all those kids, those black young socialists singing in her living room. More with Diane Ravitch when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
You're listening to Tavis Smiley. Tavis Smiley. Ranked number 45 on the Heavy 100 list of the 100 most important radio talk show hosts in America.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we do Black history every single day. In fact, as the only Black talk radio station west of the Mississippi, we are Black history. Our annual Black History Month luncheon is fast approaching, and we want to be sure to give you ample time to get your company, organization, church, or group to join us at this year's celebration on the last day of the month, Thursday, February 29th at noon. Last year, we honored iconic local Black media personalities, including Pat Harvey, Jim Hill, Mark Brown, Beverly White, Sandy Banks, and Pat Prescott, and raised $20,000 in scholarships. This year, we're honoring Black Hollywood creatives who have used their artistic genius as climate justice champions. At this year's luncheon, we will be showcasing and sharing their inspiring work on our big screen. Plus, a scrumptious meal, live music, great company, and lots of fun with your favorite KBLA Talk 1580 hosts. So contact us today at info@smileyaudio.media.com or call 323-290-4690. That's info@smileyaudio.media.com or call 323-290-4690. We hope to see you Thursday, February 29th as we close out Black History Month. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your Black.
Jackson Hewitt has a plan to get your tax refund fast with a buck here, buck there. Here a buck, there a buck, everywhere a buck.
You don't have to wait weeks for your tax refund. Get money sooner with a no-fee refund advance loan at Jackson Hewitt.
On this loan, there's a money today guarantee. E-I-E-I-DO.
Don't settle for chicken feed. Get fast bucks at Jackson Hewitt today. No-fee refund advance loans by Republic Bank offered to eligible clients. Money today guarantee if approved for a loan on a prepaid card. Details at jacksonhewitt.com.
More honesty than you can handle. More empowerment than you can imagine. You're tuned in to Tavis Smiley.
Don Rabbits, tell me when, where, how, if ever, we get to the real conversation in education about equity.
Well, we had that conversation years ago, and that conversation now is under attack. There's a lot of money going into eliminating what's called DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, you know, for a long time, colleges said this is part of our mission, and they have programs and people who work in those programs and a diversity officer, a DEI officer. There are states now that are eliminating the entire program, and they just passed a law in Florida saying that no public money can go to any college, any public college that has a diversity or equity program. So it is like critical race theory under attack, and it really, at bottom, it's about, like rolling back affirmative action. Yeah. It's an effort to restore, let's say, a colorblind approach that is inequitable.
Mm-hmm. Nicely put, very nicely put. Let me pivot right quick, watching my time here. What role do you think these so-called cultural wars are going to play, particularly in this presidential election cycle?
I think they will be large for this reason. The Republican Party will make cultural war issues big because they don't have any other program. So they can't tell you actually what they want to do about immigration at the border other than to build a wall and stop it. But they won't sit down and make a deal with the Biden administration about how to make this deal. They want to keep the issue. So they'll keep saying that the immigrants are destroying the country and poisoning the blood of our country, even though it sounds like Hitler. And they'll also keep up the attacks on sexualizing the children and pedophiles in schools. I mean, I hear this stuff all the time because people write to my blog and say, how can you defend public schools when there's so many teachers who are pedophiles? And I said, where do you get your information from? It's like some far-right crazy person site. But they prefer to talk about those issues because they have nothing to offer on health care or education. Or people's are creating jobs that people can actually work in without going through elaborate hoops to get into them. So if you don't have a program that addresses people's wants and needs, you're better off selling an attack on equity and an attack on diversity and all the culture war issues that get their base all steamed up. Because a lot of people, like in Iowa, they think something's being taken away from them if you give somebody in New York or Pennsylvania or Florida a break.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think these culture wars are going to loom large this election cycle and season, and that's not a good thing. I digress. Our remaining moments with Diane Rabbit. She mentioned her memoir that she's working on. I want to probe a little bit of that when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
Seeking the truth. Speaking the truth. This is the Tavis Smiley Show.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful. They saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles is a nonprofit law firm that protects and advances the rights of the most underserved, leveling the playing field and ensuring that everyone can have access to the justice system. Every year, LAFLA provides free, high-quality legal services to more than 100,000 people living in poverty across greater Los Angeles. Their unique combination of neighborhood offices, self-help centers at courthouses, and domestic violence clinics puts Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles on the front lines in vulnerable communities and at the forefront of change. LAFLA's expert team of attorneys, paralegals, and support staff works to provide direct representation, offer counsel and advice, provide referrals, and educate the community about their legal rights through workshops and seminars. With locations all over LA, you can access their services or volunteer to help no matter where you live. And if you have an urgent issue, call 213-235-0060. That's 213-235-0060. To get legal help, make a donation, or volunteer, visit lafla.org. lafla.org. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Substance use disorder and addiction is so isolating. And so, as a Black woman in recovery, hope must be loud. It grows louder when you ask for help and you're vulnerable. It is the thread that lets you know that no matter what happens, you will be okay.
When we learn the power of hope, recovery is possible. Find out how at startwithhope.com. Brought to you by the National Council for Mental Wellbeing, Shatterproof, and the Ad Council.
Helping to make you the most knowledgeable person in your circle of friends. This is Tavis Smiley.
Diane Rabbit, you mentioned earlier, just in passing, that you've been working on your memoirs, which I cannot wait to read. How is that process coming along? And if you got more great Bayard Rustin stories or stories like that, this is going to be a great book.
Oh, well, I've finished them and I've sent them. I found the new agent because my old agent was a Trumper and I couldn't deal with that. And I have, the book is now out at a publisher, so I'm hopeful it will be out in print in the next year or so.
Oh.
But I do have to tell you one Bayard Rustin story.
Sure.
And it's one that I treasure about him. He was very active on behalf of trying to merge the aspirations of the civil rights movement with the union movement, and he was very involved with the AFL-CIO because he thought that the power that the union movement wielded would multiply the effects of the civil rights movement. And I think he was right. He was a great believer in coalitions. And he came back from a meeting at the AFL-CIO Executive Committee, which was in Miami that particular year, and he said, I had the most exciting experience. And I can't imitate his accent. He had a clipped British accent as though he had been born in Britain, although he came from Chester, Pennsylvania. And he said, I saw Marlene Dietrich, and I adore that woman, and I made sure to have a table at the very front. And he described the dress she was wearing. It was all shimmering gold, and she was so beautiful, and she was wonderful. And he said, I love that woman. I threw flowers at her feet. And I said, well, what is it about her? I know she's a wonderful singer, and she's very beautiful, but what is it? He said, that woman told Hitler to go F himself. And if you can imagine it in this clipped British accent, it was just priceless.
That sounds like the Bayard Rustin that we were all getting to know more of. It is amazing the role that he played in, of course, making that March on Washington in 1963 actually happen, working alongside A. Philip Randolph and Dr. King and all the other big six. But his story of his brilliant organizing, his brilliant mind.
And he was a great writer.
And a great writer, indeed. That story is finally starting to be told, and it's just amazing to me. It just reminds me that that in real time, oftentimes we don't appreciate people for who they are and for their contributions.
I thought of him recently, and I thought how I wish he were here to see the recognition that he's getting, because he was frequently felt he had to stay in the shadows because he had been so vilified for being gay.
Yeah. Well, that's why.
And he was also called a communist, which was quite the joke because he was also criticized by others for being anti-communist.
Anti-communist, yeah.
And he was not a communist. He was a pacifist, and he said the greatest regret of his life was that he went to jail during World War II because he was a pacifist. And he
Yeah.
said, if I had known what Hitler was doing, I would not have been a pacifist.
No, it's a powerful statement. It just reminds me that we can't do the work that we do. We can't love and serve people for the adoration, for the adulation, or for the accolades. That's not why we do what we do. And Diane Ravitch does it better than anybody when it comes to the issue of education and educating our babies. Diane, good to have you back on this program. Great to hear your voice. I look forward to the memoir coming out, and you must return for an hour conversation when that book drops.
Well, thank you so much, Tavis, and as always, it's wonderful to talk with you.
Good to hear your voice.
Stay healthy, stay well, and keep fighting.
Same thing to you. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
Whose real name is Carlton Weekly back in 2020. A jury found that the defendants conspired to murder the African